With the recent release of the film about serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, the number of people who are curious about his life and cases seems to be on the rise. Join us today as we discuss part 2 of the two-part discussion on the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Let me jump right in here to let you know that this is part 2 of our video on the infamous man. Check out part 1 in the description. So continuing where we last left off, Jeffrey Dahmer also started eating the flesh of his victims, which marked a significant change in his conduct. There are various types of cannibalism. Some of it is not sexualized, although we are aware that certain Indian tribes and other groups have eaten their captives. This practice, however, was not sexualized. We are also aware that there was a sexual element in some cases, such as that in the case of Jeffrey Dahmer. The next section involves the blood sample which he took. Therefore, a sort of paraphilia is in the blood itself. Jeffrey Dahmer undoubtedly consumed it. He stated that it was then quite simple to taste the flesh of his victims. From there, he continued to progress and do more of it after realizing it didn't taste horrible. Before we continue, a brief request from us. If you find value in this video, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss our valuable content on psychology in the future. Now let's continue our discussion about Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey consumed internal organs while in some ways, I suppose, mingling. He had a few favorite victims who he liked to dine on while he explored their bodies. Jeffrey said that they were physically assimilating into him. They became a part of him when he swallowed their blood. He's since consumed their flesh, and all of this, including the drive to feel strong and normal, was a part of it. All of this, as Jeffrey said, was geared toward his grandiose goal which he had in mind. A fantastical idea that would surpass all others. Jeffrey Dahmer depicted his fantasies in a sketch. He was holding one completely articulated skeleton on this side of the table, and on the other end, another one was still removing the flesh from the bones in the restroom. Then, behind him, on this table, there were several more heads. He says, and I quote, "I could sit in this black chair surrounded by my friend, my best friends, and they could never leave me because they were physically part of me and emotionally they were part of me too." He said, "When I could sit in that chair, I would finally feel powerful." Several times, Jeffrey Dahmer came close to being apprehended. Conorax and Thessamphone, one of his victims, even managed to flee at first before being discovered by police in the middle of the night. However, Dahmer was successful in persuading the authorities that they were lovers, and the police released Dahmer. He was experienced, and the more practice he got, the simpler it became. Furthermore, there was no going back. There was an increase in his activities, which would eventually lead to an end. Jeffrey Dahmer was not stupid though, and he understood intellectually that the end was at the horizon. On July 22, 1991, just before midnight, Tracy Edwards, a potential victim of Dahmer's, broke out from the apartment where Dahmer had held him captive with handcuffs dangling from one arm. Police were informed and they followed him back to Dahmer's flat. There they found Dahmer tying body parts on the stove when they arrived at his home. In other words, he kept various body parts in drawers. You can then picture the odor traveling through that apartment. You can just see the two policemen who entered that flat and discovered that Jeffrey was standing behind them as they observed these remains. But Jeffrey was aware that it was over. He could have murdered them, but he chose not to. He was aware that the end was near. He was well aware that the end was right there. He was about to give up when the police showed up. He made no effort to resist at all. Jeffrey Dahmer's mother told an interviewer, "My son never tried to hurt anybody. He killed them, but he never tried to hurt them." It was completely true. An expert claims that none of the necrophiles they studied or interviewed ever attempted to harm the victims. Because they want to be with the corpse, about 95% of them are not sadistic. Therefore, Jeffrey Dahmer had no desire to harm his victims. If you look at some of his interviews, you'll see that he expressed how pitiful and pointless his life had been. You can't tell if there was any underlying sadistic tendencies. He desired to be in a relationship, therefore killing them was the process of meeting someone. Jeffrey Dahmer made his confession to the killings not long after his capture. Early in 1992, the case proceeded to trial and numerous doctors testified in favor of Dahmer, diagnosing him with paraphilia, borderline personality disorder, schizotypal disorder, and sexual sadism. There is no doubt that Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't a psychopath. An expert claims that none of the necrophiles they have spoken to or studied are real psychopaths. Therefore, Jeffrey was in fact a sociopath. And there is a significant difference between the two. Additionally, law enforcement is taught to recognize these differences. True psychopaths are typically incredibly sadistic people. They lack compassion, they dominate and manipulate people. And yes, we do observe some of these behaviors in sociopaths. However, sociopaths are also highly sensitive individuals who still value their mothers. They are still emotionally attached. Jeffrey never harbored any particular sympathy for the victims. He was aware of a blank space inside of himself. Moreover, there are some folks who can go there without us feeling horrible about anything. People like them can go there, but the majority of us don't, because it's a little frightening to know that you can look on as someone suffers and not feel guilty about it. Jeffrey had a dark spot inside of him that grew, and that's where he lived, in a very dark place. As a result, Jeffrey turned out to be a really wicked person. On November 28, 1994, a fellow prisoner at the Wisconsin facility where Jeffrey Dahmer was serving a life sentence shot and murdered the criminal. During an interview, his mother claimed that he eventually confessed to her over the phone. He knew if he was released to the streets, he would probably do it again. He stated, and I quote, I don't want to be in prison anymore, but I also know I'm too dangerous to be on the streets. End quote. Then perhaps 3 weeks later, he passed away. And according to some experts, when he was attacked, he was likely relieved. Dahmer was a large man. He could take care of himself. In reality, the attacker killed both Dahmer and the second victim at the same moment. I believe he had a lead pipe. Dahmer could have definitely retaliated, but he chose not to. He yearned for death, and this was his brilliant exit strategy. Experts assert that if he hadn't been killed, he would eventually have committed suicide. So when discussing the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, we have to take into consideration nature versus nurture. In his situation, the family had clinical depression. He most likely inherited a portion of that. Both his mother and father suffered from depression, and that would definitely aid in preparing the grounds for the absence of attachment. Remember that we are all unique at this point. As a result, not everyone handles pressures in the same manner. Stress is handled differently by different people. And when we talk about biology and genetics, we have to understand there are things that you might inherit genetically. For example, schizophrenia may be something you inherit genetically. As a result, I believe it's important to realize that there isn't simply one easy solution. This is always an intricate problem, and every physician who examined Jeffrey Dahmer's case would concur that a number of factors were at play. He lacked good communication skills and was a very needy person. In some ways, it was quite sad because most of this could have been prevented with early intervention. However, he had no one to turn to and he had no idea how to proceed. He was already too immersed in his mad and morbid dreams when he should have and could have done something. Parenting is incredibly crucial. Most persons who experience problems like that don't go on to commit murder. Jeffrey Dahmer just made some seriously terrible decisions. He knew exactly what he was doing though, so it wasn't like he had a mental illness. Because of his intense need for human contact, though there were numerous things that were present along the path, he made his own choices, and he grew considerably more at ease with the notion of being around deceased people. And of course, that changed everything for him. That concludes part 2 of our video on the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Also, be reminded that this video is primarily for information only, and we do not claim to provide professional insight in the field of psychology. Additionally, please leave a like, subscribe, and click that bell button to receive information on our new videos. If you want to watch more, you know where to find us. Anyway, see you later, and thank you for watching.